I'll start in 3, 2, 1. As a community, we have determined that if you break the laws of the society, you deserve punishment, which is to say that apparently you deserve to suffer. And this is a world in which we must live. The claim that we're making is that that shouldn't be correlative to the side effect of the precise consequences of the punishment that we've chosen, which is that you lose vast portions of your life. You lose vast portions of the opportunity to have a life that is fulfilled and that is meaningful. And that is particularly relevant in the context in which what the state purports to do with its rehabilitative prison programs is to transform you into a different person, one that could have a good life, free of crime and making contributions to the community. If it is true that you exit the community as that kind of person that the state demonstrates, then you deserve a full life because you are the kind of person that is deserving of a full life. And if the state fails you, then it is morally wrong for them to steal your life in this way. I'll make 2 points. The first will be in establishing why it is wrong for the state to steal your life in this way. The second will be in which why this policy substantially enforces the capacity of individuals to not commit crimes when they leave prison. Before we get there, I briefly want to clarify, I think the topic slide does a reasonable job clarifying here, but I want to clarify an important detail in this debate. So there is a distinction between life sentences and non-life sentences. Life sentences are given to individuals for whom the character of their crimes denotes they are unlikely to ever be able to be let back into the community. That is to say, we have made some sort of assessment upon which it is difficult for a room like this debate to say is clearly wrong, that these people are likely to commit crimes for as long as they are on this earth. This technology is inappropriate for them because it would be wrong to torture them in this way by keeping them in for the hundreds of thousands of years that their actual natural life would be exposed to. But at the same time, it would clearly be wrong to expose them to the community where the overwhelming likelihood is that they would offend again and hurt more people. Juxtapose that to the people for whom this debate is about, which is people for whom the state believes the capacity for rehabilitation is genuine. They can be allowed back into the community without the serious risk of re-offense. We're going to be discussing primarily this group in demonstrating that they deserve the second chance this policy proposes. Before I begin establishing why that is the case, I would love to take a point of information in closing opposition.
So will this increase or decrease the amount of life sentences that you're going to get?
I think it would substantially decrease the number of life sentences that you're likely to get. And the reason for that is that people that receive life sentences receive them for one of 2 reasons. The first is because the community believes that they deserve a punishment of that severity. And the second is because the community believes that they are not capable of being safely left back into the community. Now, number 2 remains receiving life sentences, but now there is no reason to give group number 1 a life sentence because you're able to give them a sentence of that degree of severity, but simultaneously give them a sentence that still allows them back into the community. However, it is important to note that the people that receive life sentences are an overwhelming minority. Even in countries that are of the hundreds of millions, life sentences tend to be in the thousands in terms of every year's sentences. On the principle. The first thing to establish here is that the goals of the community when punishing people are twofold. The first is that we aim to punish, and the second is that we aim to transform. On punishment, we aim essentially to impose a degree of suffering which deters crime and establishes justice for victims. In terms of transformation, it's a rehabilitative process that is a judgment on the community that they can become a different person after they have undergone the criminal justice process, who is less likely to commit crime and more likely to receive a whole life. These people, as a result, when they leave the prison process, which apparently according to this info slide is essentially identical, contains all of the rehabilitative elements the state is able to provide, is someone who is unlikely to commit crime, no less likely than the average person, and as a result has the same moral entitlements as an average person. As a result of that, the question of this debate, given that we're talking about individuals that have endured the same punishment and undergone the same processes of the status quo, is whether or not morally it is justified to take away their lives as opposed to just imposing this form of suffering. We perform taking away large parts of their lives is substantially unfair. The first reason for this is that we're often talking about the best years of people's lives. Years are not created equal. You have worse physiology, you have worse opportunities, and you suffer more as you get older, unless you've built up opportunities, When we take people when they're 20 and let them out of jail when they're 40, they lack the ability to handle the fact that they're 40, they don't have the opportunities that they had when they were 20, their lives are fundamentally broken. We believe that we fix that. The second reason is that it is not clear, if we establish it on the basis of natural law, that it is an entitlement of the state to take these people's lives. That is to say, we believe that people's lives, their years alive, if there is a meaningful alternative, is something that should not be taken, because morally speaking, that is the kind of entitlement that the state does not have clear jurisdiction over. Remember, the state merely reflects the will of the majority and should be substantially constrained by a conception of natural rights. A conception of natural rights in this debate is one that establishes the idea that people fundamentally should be established to be free in and of themselves if they are not harms to other people. If there is an opportunity to form these into people that are not harms to other people and simultaneously one that is able to accomplish that, we're happy to do this. The third reason to note is obviously the criminal justice system is often capricious and arbitrary. It disproportionately targets ethnic minorities, and as a result, a policy that is generally less punitive and less able to demand things of people like years of their life is one that does not target people unfairly as much as it does at the moment. Secondly, on incentives and capacity for rehabilitation. The first thing to say is that this means that people are less likely to commit crimes when they're let out, because we know that a lot of people commit crimes when they're let out of jail for the simple and unfortunate reason that when they are let out of jail, they are more likely to commit crimes out of necessity. Necessity grows as you get older because job opportunities grow as you get older, both in the sense that employers believe that you have less capacity to grow into a particular role because you're older and fixed in your ways, and because many employers that use your physical skills are likely to believe that you're less physically capable because you are older. This policy fixes that. But secondly, it incentivizes rehabilitation in the prison system because when you send people to jail at the moment, we know that they're not going to be let out for 20 or 30 years, which means they are somebody else's problem. We don't need to reform it. Whereas when the prison systems that we set up are ones in which you're going to be let out in a matter of days, you have as a government a profound incentive to ensure that the people that you let out of jail are far less likely to commit crime. The government is a team that is able to guarantee that people are treated more fairly and more in accordance with their entitlements under the criminal law. And we are a team that is able to ensure that these people are more likely to live full lives in which the community is less likely to be victims of their crime. We are profoundly proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check that both panels are ready as well? Cool. Then without further ado, I'm very happy to call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, but just to clarify, when I asked for order of speakers before, I believe Abena said they will be speaking first. Do you have Kojo speaking first and Abena second?
I had Kojo speaking first.
Okay, so I probably have miswritten. Sorry. So whenever you're ready.
Hello. Okay, sure. So starting in 3, 2, 1. I know the first thing you need to know is that today's debate asks us to look at the essence of the prison-like system that we have. Whether it's a matter of just rehabilitating people or whether it is for a particular purpose, right? So what is
just a sec, sorry. I hate to break you. Is it only on my end or is Kojo breaking off?
Yeah,
it's for me as well.
Yeah.
Kojo, can you check your audio again, please?
Sure, please.
Let's try all turn off our cameras for this speech and see if it helps. Try speaking again.
Okay, sure. Hello, am I audible?
It's better now. Let's hope it stays this way, and I'll tell you if not.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. So I'm set to begin in 3, 2, 1. Panel, The essence of today's debate is to let us assess the prison system or the CGS and why it uses incarceration as a form of punishment. One is the value of this system, and does it lie within the fact that people are able to be rehabilitated in that process, or it exists particularly for other purposes? Now, you get only rehabilitation in all this world. I'm going to show you why that in and of itself is not the essence of the prison system. First an analysis or first idea is to how that particular rehabilitation has failed us for quite a while now, right? So the purpose of this thing and then the impact of this particular argument is to show you that if rehabilitation, which OG says is the essence of these prison systems, have failed and are not going to, I should actually prioritize going to get from us as our main case in today's debate. So on why rehabilitation is not necessarily the essence of the prison system. One, on failure. That for quite a while now, there have been several instances where prisoners would, people would be incarcerated and then they will come back and do and still perpetrate the particular crimes that for which they're sent to prison, right? It looks like one, the gangs existing in prison systems that harden particular criminals, and when they come back, they become worse off than they were, right? But secondly, it looks like these particular people, when they go, because of the particular experiences and hardship, they equally get hardened, and when they come back, there's no particular utility. But thirdly, it looks like how the enforcement mechanisms and rehabilitation services that exist within the system necessarily are not having any particular impact and all of those things on these people. But even in some prisons, the fourth reason is why the harsh conditions that exist within the system really prevents the state from able to carry out rehabilitation, right? In their world, they do not fix any of these problems. They just stimulate these problems and then give these prisoners a very a virtual experience of all these things. What that means is that even in the best of their world, you don't get particularly rehabilitation in that front, right? What then is the essence of what then is the essence or the other value that exists within this same process? From our side of the house, we think is the amount of time that people are able to experience in this particular prisons. That is what is working. That is what is sustaining the CVS now. In their world, time looks like this. You've been sent to the prison for 5 years, but you are going to be stimulated, like you're going to take taken through this stimulation for just probably 3 days or 5 days. Why is that particularly important, or why is that necessarily problematic? We think that what that means is that that person necessarily does not get to spend the entire 5 years as it's supposed to be given to them, but then they're able to spend it in just 3 years, right? And then OG says that the value of this is that once rehabilitation is served, they are already engaged their house. Why rehabilitation is not necessarily served in that instance? What then is the essence of time? One, we think that in a world where these rehabilitation systems are so that the time one keeps people, keep the society safe for a particular period of time, it looks like sending murderers to prison for 10 years to make sure that society is safe for that particular 10 years. In their world, society has become safe for 3 years. But I'm going to show you why. Secondly, why that time frame is even important and help us to incapacitate the problem. And we think that people become resourceful within a particular period, right? So, for example, I'm able to get work and I'm able to make my contact and work for a short period of time, right? But in our world where these people are taken to prison for 10 years, it means that their engagement to that particular work and resources that they have is been taken away from them, because in their world, what happens is this: these people after the simulation, there's a very short time they get to be reconnected with their world that they furthered out. The importance of wealth in crime is that once people have resources, once people have wealth and all of those things, they're able to use this to perpetrate this particular crime. In a world where these people are incarcerated for 10 years in real time, the impact of that by the time that they return, they might not necessarily have that same wealth, right? Because of volatility of wealth and because of volatility of wealth, it means that that particular period, they will have their wealth distributed and be sent into other places, right? What that means that at that time particular year, even if rehabilitation is not served, that person loses his access to his resources and all of those things. In their world, because there is shorter time, that person can just come back and then actually get reconnected to resource and crime still perpetuates, right? On impact, we get a world where we're able to necessarily check crime better because people lose their wealth, access to their wealth for a long period of time. But then second thing on why those things, value of deterrence that exists in keeping people away, right? The value of time that exists in keeping people away. We think that the deterrence factor in being away for people for so long is how these people get like do not have access to their family members and anymore, like because of the value that we give to family and the relationship that we have as people. And the relationship that we have as people, right? Because of this value, think that in a world where there is a threat to be able to prolong your access to this particular relationship that you have, people are less likely incentivized to commit crime in this particular regard. But in their world, this is what happens. We all know that your sentence is going to be stimulated, and then in real time, you're going to have that little experience, right? What that means is that there is still that hope of being reunited with the people you put value on within the shortest possible of time. What that means is that the deterrence necessarily is not self-attached, but not the fear of being away from family is one of the things that is sustaining incarceration in that particular regard, and we value it in our world, right? But final, what are the large impacts that we get from us, right? The first impact, right? The first impact we get from us looks like this. It looks like how the individual is necessarily kept from his resources for a longer period of time, and how like the natural economic cycle is able to redistribute these resources. But secondly, that victims in all of this are given better closure because they know that that person has been taken, like something valuable has been taken from that person, and that valuable thing is time, right? I've already given an answer to you why it's very valuable to people. But secondly, that society becomes safe for a longer period of time, and also there's that assurance that that person in the long run will be incapacitated to perpetuate that particular time. The largest effect is on the justice system because they are supposed to ensure that some of these things happen. In their world, this is what happens because of how the person still has access to time, which is the most important thing we have to consider in today's days. In that the justice system loses its focus and then is not able to serve its purpose for which reason it exists, right? The justice system exists to, one, keep society safe for the longest period of time possible, but two, it also exists to make sure that there is deterrence in the system. How do I achieve those particular things in the system? It's when we make time the real punishment that these people suffer necessarily, right? So, panel, what are you to weigh this debate on? You're supposed to weigh this debate on the essence of time, because that's the only difference that exists between like OG's world and our world. It's the time, right? In our world, we think that there is so much value of time. Time is a very necessary resource. And in an instance where rehabilitation does not work, we think that time is the right punishment and it's commensurate to getting justice done. Proud to be.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready? And the other panel is also ready? Cool. Then I'm very happy to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Thank you. I'm just going to close the door 1 minute. So I will discuss 3 things in this speech. I just started my timer, sorry. First, this simulated incarceration is more just and humane for offenders. Second, the simulated incarceration has bred a potential for rehabilitation. And third, it is better and at least neutral on the question of deterrence. We think substantial deterrence is still achieved. So on the first question, on the simulated incarceration being more just and humane, and importantly, we think this is the most critical question in the debate for the reason that the offenders are the primary stakeholder. And that's because this debate affects them in a way that's much more intense than almost anybody else, because it goes to the question of their right to access the only non-replenishable resource we have as human beings, which is our time on the planet. And that's why Ben was discussing natural rights in the course of his Prime Minister speech, because this is a thing that once taken away, there's no way you can get back. It's different from money, it's different from any other currency that people can use in their life. And importantly, these life years or life minutes are not created equal, because when you're younger, those years are better quality. And plus there's an element of path dependency, which is to say that the more of those years spent in contact with the justice system is actually itself something that has huge predictive impact on your future contact with the justice system. And that's foreshadowing already the way we'll deal with the issue of deterrence at the end of this speech, which is to say that minimizing people's real world contact with the justice system is itself something that we think is first critical to their right to live a good life, but also has flow-on effects that benefit society as well, positive sum impacts in that sense. So what are we saying in this issue? We say that the purpose of incarceration is about punishment, and it's about causing a mental change, a mental transformation in the individual who goes to prison under that sentence. It's reasonable in this debate to say that the simulation substantially achieves the punitive and rehabilitative qualities that actual prison does, because that's the definition provided to us in the info slide. In that sense, the thing that the people that the offenders are being punished with is a deprivation of leisure, that is the ability to live free from the experience of jail, and they're being punished by the undesirable qualities of jail and the opportunity to reflect in that dream state, in this case, on their actions to transform as a person through reflection and recognition of what they did that was wrong. And that's a recognition that can occur within minutes of landing in a jail cell, knowing that you're going to be there for what will feel like years and years to come, or it's something that can come halfway through that or 3/4 of the way through that. The thing is, the justice system, the judge who gives the sentence, can never know when that realization and transformation will occur. And in that sense, it's a crude measure they use in the status quo to say, we will lock you away for 5 years, 8 years, 15 years, not for your life, because we think you can rehabilitate, but we'll lock you away for a long time. We trust that somewhere in that, this change will occur. The magic of this technology is that you don't need to specify, you don't need to deprive someone of that total length of time in order for them to have a realization in what feels to them like that amount of time. And that's critical because it solves an injustice in the status quo, which is the arbitrary deprivation of those life years, which are a fundamental entitlement of a human being. We don't arbitrarily deprive people of all the life years that would have been lost through jail after that transformation has taken place. And that is the biggest incalculable benefit that occurs in this world, because those people don't deserve to be arbitrarily punished by the carceral state. We give them that liberty, and that's a non-renewable resource accruing straight back to them. So that is why we think this is more humane and why that matters so much in this debate. At that point, I'll take a POI from closing half, if I may.
Yeah, so basically this needs to be set on the average experience. But for people who are going to have a sub-average experience in terms of, for example, staying away from trouble in jail, the simulation is going to force them to have the average experience, because you never can individualize this because you don't know all of the factors.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not quite sure that the model, that the topic does tie us to being unable to localize this to some degree. So if, I'll leave that to the adjudicators, but in the world you think the topic permits us to allow some localization, we're happy to at least have a little bit. If you're a bit queasy about that, and maybe I'm a little bit too, the other thing we'd say is that there's a trade-off in crudity here. And we'd rather the crudity that says everyone will receive a minimum quality jail standard, even if some people are not getting the Rolls-Royce jails that they were used to before. We think the experience they receive in jail is still likely to meet the minimum standards. And that's actually a huge benefit. Like, one of the reasons jails suck so much in the status quo is that we can't police them all and get into them all, and especially where many of them are privatized and so on. Often the state doesn't have the resources or the interest in enforcing good measures. Probably much easier and cheaper to do that here, which we think is a huge benefit for their rights. That sounds likely to be at a better level. So that's a good question. I'll take a POI from the opening, and I'll note for the adjudicators we're being charitable in doing this because they didn't take one from us. Opening.
On what basis do you assume that individuals will automatically reform mentally just because they are feeling 5 years, but it's actually 5 days?
We don't assume that they will. We just translate the fact that if they do so in jail normally, they are likely to do so here because the experience is the same. So the only way they could possibly not is if something is occurring outside their lived experience, which seems unlikely. So simulated incarceration is better potential for rehabilitation. Going to that very point. This matters because rehabilitation is purported to be a core function of incarceration, but also because offenders at issue in this debate are characterized by good prospects for rehabilitation because they committed a less serious offense and received a non-life sentence. As B showed you in his speech, we think there's greater capacity and greater incentive to rehabilitate individuals in these cases. There's greater capacity because they are younger and because we have written them off to a lesser extent. They have less resentment back towards the state and less disenfranchised and past dependency and less contact with the justice system at that point in their life. There's greater incentives on the state to do so because those people have more years ahead of them and a greater incentive then to protect society. Finally, on deterrence, you heard this is less of a punishment. We think this is actually less important than humane treatment because we wouldn't just maximize punishments to deter people at the expense of human rights. But we think that even so, when they told us that, well, your family isn't being punished in this case, and that's actually something that like removes the deterrence factor or it's happening quicker, we would say it's a benefit on our side to in fact not punish families alongside the individual in question, because those families don't deserve to be punished as like casualties in that sense. So we think this is fairer and that matters most. We think it does have good impacts on protection and deterrence. We're very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check that both panels are ready? Then I am very happy to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hello, am I audible? Okay, great. Ready to start? Okay. Right, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, notice that the conception of justice is not one that must only be done, but actually seen to be done. The dispensation of justice should not only prioritize the offender, it must make sure that it's a balancing effect between 1, interest of the state, 2, protection of society, 3, the interest of victims, because these are the main primary actors that crimes affect. In a world where you only prioritize the offender who actually has disrupted societies like security, we think that that world in and of itself is questionable, because OG does not even attempt to seek to defend the interest of the state, defend the interest of citizens. What they question is the state's right to do this. Notice that their world is still symmetric, because if they say the state has no right to cap individuals' time and opportunities, notice that the mental effect of the person undergoing this punishment still feels the state capping their time in terms of 5 years in jail or 10 years in jail. The difference here is that society sees that the person faced only 3 days in jail as opposed to 3 years. Why is this fast justice wrong, right? The overarching goal here is that the trust in the CJS is one that is questionable. The goals of the CJS is not only to rehabilitate individuals or cause a mental change, is to ensure that there's an reintegration in society. Notice that because the mental effect does not transcend beyond the person feeling it, but society society is unable to conceptualize that particular individual's feeling that jail time, all the benefits you get from OG is not realized because 1, societal reintegration of the person does not happen. Notice that all their argumentation, for example, individuals having the opportunity to work again, socialize with people, is contingent on social integration. At the point in time where there's little to no mechanization as to how they will reintegrate individuals in society, at the point where society feels this particular dispensation of justice is inadequate, their benefits do not materialize, right? But more importantly, notice how the TGS loses its relevance in terms of victim closure, because there's little to no opportunity for victims to assess what is retributive enough. There's no inclusion on the part of these particular individuals because 1, the state decides how long is what is retributive enough. That is to say, an individual can go to jail for 5 years mentally, but on conceptually or in real life, they are just facing 3 days in jail. We think that particularly means that you are taking little to no cognizance of the interest of victims. Why is this particularly bad? Because 1, it means that the incentive for individuals to resort to the justice system in instances of crime is one that is not realized. But 2, It means that people are more likely to resort to self-justice because they don't believe what they get from the justice system is enough. Notice, panel, that this particular mental conception, because individuals feel the jail time on both sides of the house, they needed to analyze to us why that time, like why saving time or not wasting the person's time is of an overarching benefit, right? But then two more rebuttals. Firstly, they question the right of the state to take individuals' lives and make an analogy between lives and suffering and why that is bad. Firstly, we think that the goal of the justice system is beyond this particular thing. It's more of protection of society. Notice that there are particular crimes that this particular jail time provides unique benefits, right? Especially drug crimes, right? Why is this particularly important? Because usually in instances of drug crimes or in instances of high crime societies, individuals who are like in prison, even at a point where we are unable to effectively rehabilitate them, we protect society by one, the lack of their ability to return to destroy evidence, two, the lack of the ability to come back and murder victims or suspects in the crime, three, the ability to influence how state proceedings go about. We think that at the point in time where we are able to gain these unique benefits, the consideration should not necessarily be about the suffering these individuals face as opposed to wasting their lives, because on both sides of the house, these things particularly exist. But then they question the right of the state to take individuals' natural lives, right? Why does the state have this particular right? Because we think that at the point in time where a person commits a crime, they do not only commit a crime against the victim, but commit a crime against the state. That is why state machinery exists to prosecute the crime and ensure that individuals enforce law. So we have public defendants prosecuting crimes, we have states implementing machinery of prison systems, etc., to ensure that individuals are able, to ensure the state takes back its cake in terms of what has been lost, right? At the point in time where you question the state's ability to take individuals' conception of natural lives, you needed to further justify why the state does not have to, the state does not have the right to protect its own interests in instances where it sets laws, people through the social contract agree to the laws, but yet still breach these particular laws. We think that that particularly needed to answer. I'll take a POI from closing immediately.
Yeah, you just said that the state is punishing individuals because of a wrong that they did proportional to that wrong. Do you think that it is the case that individuals should be punished predictably and proportionally clearly to the wrong that they did?
Speaker, I think that should be done, but secondly, it should be seen to be done. And that's basically the essence of our case. The fact that this should not only be done in the offender's mental framework, but should be done on the part of society observing that this particularly is done. Secondly, what are the unique benefits? What are the unique, the harms that comes with the slow illusion of passing time, right? One, it means there's no interaction with society. Society is unable to sympathize with these individuals, because notice that in instances where an individual faces this particular jail time and return, the sympathy is on two levels. One, either the individuals in society now believe that, oh, they have served enough time, they are back as rehabilitated persons, etc., and therefore are more sympathetic towards them. Or secondly, society becomes very aggressive against such individuals. We think that the second outcome is more likely on their side of the house. The harms of this aggressiveness is that one, these particular individuals that they are seeking to protect end up not being the center of justice because society is unable to accept them. Notice that the goal of incarceration is not just about inflicting pain, but to keep society safe and restore balance. We are proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for that kind speech. Can I quickly check both panels already? Then I'm very happy to call on the member of government. Here.
Is this audible? Great. 3 points of extension from closing government. First, why we have much stronger rehabilitation on our side. Second, why this is principally illegitimate on their side. Thirdly, if I have time, or more general argument about how we change criminal justice policy moving forward. I appreciate the first two arguments are reaching at the same impact as OG, but as you'll see throughout my speech, our mechanisms are going to be radically different, and we have a number of points of weighing about why they are stronger. Before that, a few points of rebuttal to opening opposition. Firstly, on this being an effective deterrent. Notice that people's conception of being deterred isn't usually based on the level of punishment they face, but whether they believe they are going to get caught in the first instance. The actual nature of the crime is not, and the punishment that happens is not the point of deterrence that happens. But secondly, we want to point out that this is very, very short term, right? Because even if people internalize this as not even being as big a harm as losing years of life, as soon as the first people go through the system and actually demonstrate to people and tell people their experiences was bad, this becomes internalized as actually a severe harm. Lastly, to deal with opening opposition's claim about relationships, you still feel the pain of not having those relationships for the years that you experience inside the machine. This distinction is that when you come out of that machine, you can go back to those relationships, so the pain stays. The other thing they say is that justice won't be seen to be done. I have another 2 points of response here. The first thing to note is that this is a very, very short-term harm, ladies and gentlemen, because at the point at which this becomes a norm in society is a point at which it becomes seen as a legitimate form of justice. Just a simple thought experiment here. When justice systems started to become more rehabilitative rather than and less retributive, these were the same arguments used by people in opening opposition to say that they haven't served their time, they're having a cushy time in prison, as many people might say about Norwegian or Scandinavian prison systems. That same criticism changed over time as the norms around what prison is about changes. So this is an extremely short-term harm that doesn't stay in the long term. But on the comparative, we actually have far better ability for people to integrate in society, because to the extent that there is a short-term harm, over the long run, we see individuals being able to come back into society with connections and families that they can go back to that allows them to reintegrate. That deals with opening opposition. First extension on rehabilitation. The first mechanism that opening government provides is that you often come out quite old, you're poor, your physical capacities decline, so you have to turn to a life of crime. We have 3 separate mechanisms that we think are far more important than this. The first is that when you go to prison, there is a very high incidence of you likely to join a gang. The reason for this is very simple. Prisons are quite dangerous for individuals. They need protection, and in order to get that protection, they often join a gang, and gangs often actively recruit people. What is the problem with joining a gang? The problem with joining a gang is that even once you leave prison, you can't leave that gang. You are tied to that gang forever. Those people don't want you to leave because they will hunt you down because they are scared that you will tattle on them. So once you join a gang in prison, that is seen as a lifelong commitment to that gang, and you will be hunted down or you will face severe repercussions if you try to leave once you are outside, which means you are locked into a life of crime that you opted into because you needed to be protected in the prison system when you entered. Secondly, many people often become addicted to drugs in prison. These are both innocent and not innocent people. The reason for this is that they turn to things like drugs as a coping mechanism, and individuals and cartels who have members inside these gangs use drugs to push them to these individuals to get them into the gang and get them beholden to the gang. What that means is once you leave prison, you are often addicted to drugs for a long time. So either you're unable to get a job because you can't go with a drug addiction, or you turn to a life of crime to fuel that drug addiction. The third thing is that you lose your connections to a significant extent if you spend a lot of time in jail. You lose connection to your family and friends. What that means is it changes your risk calculus to whether you commit crime or not, because you have much less to lose since you've already lost those connections. Whereas on our side, you have felt the pain of losing those connections, but once you come out, you still have those connections there. So you understand the magnitude of the loss that you are giving up. So the extent of you committing crime is much better. Why is this a far stronger mechanism than opening government? 3 points. Notice this works for a far larger group of people than opening government's mechanism. People, for example, who serve 6 month to 2 year sentences, but still need to engage in things like protection and coping mechanisms in that time. So the vast majority of people who aren't serving 20 to 30 year sentences, but 2 to 3 years, 6 months to a year, things like petty crime, things like drug abuses in many instances. Secondly, there is a growing trend of trying to solve these problems in other ways. So for example, in many states, you see attempts to try and, for example, stop people from discriminating because you can hide your criminal record. The problem is, even if you can hide your criminal record, solving OG's problem, that doesn't solve problems like getting addicted to drugs, joining a gang, because these are individual specific problems that have no systematic solution, and therefore this is the only mechanism to solve them. Closing.
So this is what we actually explained. There are people in status quo who don't do drugs or don't join a gang. Your simulation forces them to do so because it's a universalized experience of prison.
No, this is obviously not a universalized experience. This is a complete assertion. Obviously, the way this will be done will be based on the individual. Like, we don't send people to the exact same prison in the status quo. In the same way, we won't give everyone the exact same simulation. This is likely to be tailored to be maximally rehabilitative, as I think opening government fiated fairly, but also we're going to provide structural reasons for why that is the case. Opening opposition.
If your problem is with prison structure, they can be remedied by prison reforms. It doesn't justify why you need this simulation.
Okay, got it. One, that is extremely unlikely as we've seen, but I just demonstrated why things like reforming the way you can hire prisoners doesn't affect individual circumstances. The other mechanism OG outlined is that rehabilitation is no longer your problem if they get out in 3 days. The more important mechanism is that now people know that politicians and individuals fully control the simulation, answering CEO's POI, so there is pressure to construct it in the maximally rehabilitative way, because people know that if people come out in 3 days and crime rates have gone up, you can directly blame that politician. This is also more important than opening government stuff on rehabilitation for the same mechanism I said. Most people don't have 20-year sentences. There's a lot of 6-month to 1-year sentences, 1 year to 2-year sentences. So that mechanism that they provide is incredibly marginal, but knowing the capacity of politicians to fully control this structure is more important because you can't blame shift onto other institutions. Secondly, on the principle, opening government's problem here is that rehabilitated people deserve their lives. 3 deficiencies here. What about people who don't rehabilitate? Second, they never prove the loss of your life is not a legitimate punishment. And thirdly, we're going to expand the group of people that face unjust punishment. The basic thesis for this claim is that we would not punish innocent individuals we would not punish innocent individuals. So if you do 0 wrong, you deserve 0 punishment. In the same way, if you commit like level 2 wrong, you deserve level 2 punishment on a basis of just desert. The reason this is important is it is structurally impossible to get proportional punishment for individuals in the current prison system. Why? Because if you want to punish them with a 10-year sentence, there's a bunch of ancillary harms that are really harmful that they're exposed to while they're in prison. They could get stabbed, they could join a gang, they might develop a drug addiction. There's a huge host of additional harms beyond the proportional harm that is generated that is not legitimate. Why is it that deviations are immoral? We think that it would be immoral to just punch someone in the face for no reason. However, desert makes things justified. So we would not criminalize self-defense because that wrong of killing someone is not wrong to begin with, because it is justified for you to do so because that person deserved it. Therefore, penalties are only justified insofar as they are warranted, and insofar as there are huge ancillary harms to the structure that we avoid, we prevent the worst moral wrong happening. Even if sentences are too lenient, that is still better on our side, so we don't have extrajudicial mechanisms like gangs, and we don't harm all the innocent families of these individuals who are pushed to a life of crime as well because they are more poor. On both rehabilitation and principle, we have far stronger and more expansive mechanisms than OG propose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check both panels already? Great, then I'm very happy to call upon the member of opposition. Okay,
can you please confirm that I'm clearly audible? Okay, I will just set up my timer. In that case, I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Bunch of content, won't bother flagging it all. Rebuttal is integrated, governments are wrong. Neither government team decides to actually engage with the experience of being in the simulation, which is why they don't prove their mutual metric of rehabilitation. Let's analyze this experience and rebut them in the process. 1, know that you fundamentally lose every contact with the outside world in terms of those connections that the closing government cares about you having. This means you do not receive letters from your family. This means that you do not receive visits. This means that you become aware that you will spend a year or 2 or 20 in a situation where nobody actually cares about you, or even if they do, you cannot reach them. You become aware that you're going to be fundamentally alone and cut off from everyone who cares about you at that point, which means that you are less likely to engage with the rehabilitative mechanisms, even if this exists within the simulation. Secondly, even if the government can fiat rehabilitative elements like psychologists and parole officers, I'm not sure they can because this is tied to the outside world, but even if they can, know that you're fundamentally aware that this is not real because you're being sentenced to a simulation. So the interaction you have with that psychologist or with your cellmate, there is a profound awareness that you're factually alone. Everything around you is a computer game and you are the only person in here. You therefore become aware you're going to spend years detached from any meaningful human interaction, and that no connection that you form is going to be one that is actually with a human being who understands you and empathizes with you. Not trivial, like this is why solitary confinement kills people's brains, because you're aware that people are outside, but you cannot meaningfully interact with them. Now, we do this to people for a matter of years, which means that, again, your likelihood of engaging with rehabilitational mechanisms, even if they exist, becomes lower. Thirdly, you presumably cannot access things like vocational training and education, things that actually provide you skills to work after prison, specifically If you have to find a job, not to perpetuate the necessity of committing crimes because you do not have like economic capital and things like this, which means that insofar as you do not provide skills to these people and you cannot provide them meaningfully because it's tied to outside things like faculties who provide these programs and diplomas, we don't think that you can provide this for prisoners. But fourthly, know that behavior is very often a good indicator of whether people are actually rehabilitated. They cannot functionally monitor behavior because the passages of time are different. Because if 20 years is 5 days in our world, then it's fast forward, and we cannot monitor the simulation what's going in there. So we cannot monitor how this person is interacting with the system, which means we cannot monitor whether they're a model prisoner, whether they're engaging with the system, therefore whether they are rehabilitated. So insofar as there is a duty towards both the person and society, as government says, you are incapable to perpetuate that duty. The comparative with the real life is, yes, we lose time, but we give more chances for people, more likelihood for them to actually engage with the system that they have. We provide more skills and we maintain their mental sanity. Both governments choose to run a principle, whether the state can take your life or whether this is a principally justified punishment. Know that even when people are sentenced to life sentences, we do not give them a psychological punishment, right? We do not torture them. We only punish them to the extent to which is necessary for the safety, or if it's not a life sentence, for rehabilitation. We only limit autonomy to a bodily extent. What happens here? A fundamental distortion of the body and mind, because now you have years worth of experience in terms of memories and in terms of chemical reactions in your brain. Your brain has aged in one particular way because it's interacted with different memories and its buildup has changed, but in a biological way, your brain hasn't aged. The human body has no precedent for this and was never biologically adapted to this, which means that on a basic biological level, this fucks up your brain chemistry, your dopamine, your serotonin. You're likely to come out and have things like, at the worst case scenario, like psychological disorders. You cannot sleep, you cannot perceive time normally. You probably have PTSD because you have to reconcile the fact that you have aged 20 years, but your body hasn't changed, and your perception of other people, this is not in conjunction with your perception of other people. This is therefore a disproportionate punishment. It is a punishment of the mind and fundamental debodification. Insofar as both governments can see that even when it's a life sentence, we do not take away the mental agency of people, we do not torture them. This means that for people who are not sentenced to life sentences, things like petty theft as closing government frames, they cannot prove as per their own principle that this is a proportional punishment, especially because we have no precedent for this. Human beings have never experienced this. So insofar as we have no knowledge of what is actually caused to the human mind, we're implementing a punishment where we do not know the consequences, and this is principally legitimate. But I also want to talk about further harms of this policy and why it's horrible, which is also simultaneously going to prove the principle and destroy the principle on the government side. Before I move on, I'm willing to take opening. Okay, that's one PI.
Yes, quickly. If we could give a realistic simulation like this to people in solitary confinement, it really wouldn't have the qualities of torture that many people say it has now. Like, you get realistic interaction that addresses the human need for interaction.
Aware why that this interaction isn't real in the first place, as I've explained earlier. But secondly, if you want to frame this as an average simulation, which is specifically what Lover flags in his POI, you have to give everyone the average prison experience because it simulates what is real in prison. So if governments say it's real that in prison you join gangs, it's real that in prisons you try drugs, the simulation is wired in such a way to push you to do this because this is the realistic prison experience for a lot of people, as closing government says, which means you further reduce their agency and push them to do behaviors they otherwise wouldn't. What are the other harms of this policy? One, if government wants to talk about opportunities and employment, especially if we talk about minorities towards whom there's already prejudice in society, know that perception matters. When you go to real life jail, a person was removed from society, time has passed, they have experienced pain, and they have paid their dues to society. Comparatively, people do not understand the experience of being in a simulation. They don't know what it means. They know that this person went for 5 days and now a potentially dangerous person who can sell drugs in my neighborhood, who can shoot me in front of my front door. After 5 days, they're in society again. They did not even suffer social disapprobation. They didn't lose their job. They didn't suffer any sanctions, which means that not only does society feel this is unfair, which means they probably push for more life sentences in fringe cases, but they also feel unsafe. They don't want to interact with these people. They don't want to give them jobs. They don't want to talk to them because they feel that this is the same person who literally a week ago killed someone or stole from someone, and now they're roaming the streets again because you do not have perception of the passage of time, and this prisoner cannot communicate 20 years worth of experiences in 5 days after they're out, which means that you perpetuate this necessity, you do not solve it. Before I move on to even more harms, I'll take closing very quickly.
This is the same kind of thought process that people had when rehabilitation was first instituted. Over time, norms change in society so that people become more accepting. Why is this not an extremely short-term harm on your side?
Trenton, people are literally voting for candidates on the basis of being hard on crime. Look at the United States of America. People fear crime bipartisanly. This is why very often public prosecutors end up being senators, because they run on the platform of having reduced crime. This only works in a liberal bubble that you live in. What are the other harms of this policy? Note, there is no judicial review, because in the real world, 4 or 5 days have passed, which means there is no time to go to a court of appeals. There is no time to push for new evidence or new witnesses. This means that in cases where people would have had their sentences lowered because they were unjustly sentenced in the first place because of a lack of evidence, they do not have access to this. You get a sentence and no ability to appeal. This becomes even worse in cases where there are minorities towards whom we have institutionalized biases, as government concedes, and principally unjustified, because the government doesn't have epistemic access to all of the circumstances of your crime, which means for the judgment to be moral, they need to leave space for them to admit their wrongs, which doesn't happen here. But also, you cannot reduce people's sentences on the basis of them being a model prisoner, which means you cannot reward them for their behavior, which means that insofar as they could deserve a reward, you're unable to give it to them. But lastly, in terms of connections, you have come back from a year in a simulation. You're in pain. You have to process this, and you're expected to go back to work tomorrow. You're expected to resume your social connections tomorrow. You're not able to maintain this because you haven't recovered from the process. So you lose that job and you lose those connections. But the fact that less time has passed doesn't mean you're able to retain them. For all of those reasons, closing opposition has won.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I ask for epistemic access to whether both panels are ready? Then I'm very happy to call on the government whip. Here.
Am I audible? Three things in this speech. First, I'm going to show why closing opposition is out of this debate. Second, I'm going to show what the extensions that Bobby provided for you clearly win closing government this debate. First, on why closing opposition is out of this debate, it's because they didn't read the info slide. Firstly, their claim is that you lose all contact with the outside world, and you know that this is a fake simulation, so you don't engage, etc., etc. This experience is designed to be fully real. Presumably, that also means you understand that it's real, because it wouldn't be a fully real experience if you believed that it was a fake experience that you individual was engaging with throughout the entirety of that period of time. So it's very unclear why this is the case. I'm going to get later why the sense that you've lost your relationships when you get your relationships back when you leave prison is actually going to be a particular additional factor of deterrence, thus flipping their case. Next, on the vocational claim, I'm genuinely unclear why this is the case. Presumably, if we have the technology to literally create an entire artificial world, we can also program into that world teachers who can teach you skills and tests that you can take in order to make sure that you can get diplomas. I think this is far easier because the scalability of providing these resources is far greater on our side of the house, when you don't need lots of teachers, you just need a computer program that you can download into individuals' heads. So I'm genuinely unclear why we do not get more vocational experiences on our side. Their next claim was that it's a distortion of the mind. It's a fundamental immoral intrusion on these individuals. Firstly, it's safe by the info slide, so it's not going to cause deep psychic distress, because presumably that wouldn't be a safe technology if it caused individuals to have mental breakdowns. Secondly, this is uncomparative. Prison already does this in the status quo, like solitary confinement, that we do know results in mental breakdowns in significant numbers of individuals. So even if this is true, I'm unclear why this is net greater than whatever the counterfactual would comparatively be. Their best implication on this is, well, you can't prove that it's proportional because it's potentially unknown, but the response to this is as follows. As Bobby highlights, we already know the unpredictability of punishment in prison, that some individuals get murdered in prison even when they're only in there for a short period of time, which is not the punishment that we think these individuals deserved. So you have a known, certain unpredictability and almost certainty of moral evil inflicted on some prisoners on the opposition side of the house, whereas we have greater levels of control that at least can reasonably predicted to control any moral evil that could occur. I think therefore we're already winning on this potential clash. Now on to closing government's claim that is basically them repeating opening opposition, that society won't trust you, that they will not see this as an adequate punishment. Firstly, I think all of Bobby's analysis still applies, that this is a time-dependent thing. So even if it occurs in the short term, at the point at which this is demonstrated to actually be a sufficient punishment, I think that this applies better in the long term. And given that the long term applies to far more individuals than the immediate term, we're already winning this debate. But I think it's even worse, because as Tim concedes in response response to the POI, there are already some of these sentiments in the status quo. Individuals already see that the prison system is often ineffective at rehabilitating individuals, and so push for increasingly long sentences. So I'm genuinely unclear why this leads to a net reduction in sentences on their side of the house, given that those sentiments already exist. And I think, and this also directly responds to opening opposition's claim, that this is hung on rehabilitation, because society might care a little bit about thinking that a punishment reaches a certain level of like pain inflicted on someone. But what they often care about in terms of social reintegration is the sense that individual is safe to be around again, that they can reintegrate that individual and not fear that that person is going to commit future acts of crime, which means that the potential reintegration or trust of these criminals is dependent ultimately on the fact that rehabilitation occurs. And this is where Bobby's extension fits in to further beat closing opposition and opening opposition. And that is that we can effectively increase rehabilitation by having specific control over the environment. We can remove gangs, we can remove acts of danger. And responding to closing government's claim that, yes, no, you have to program gangs into the simulation, I would presume that we would program the simulation to comply with what we think is legal to do in prison, and thus wouldn't program into the simulation acts of crime committed against you by other individuals. Like, I'm unclear why we would program fake things into the simulation to like come and like beat you up or stab you, given that's things that we try to prevent in the prison structure in the status quo. CO?
Like, you need to read the info slide, you need to be realistic. This is the reality, you need to program it.
Right, but you can have a realistic prison that is safe because that's what we try to do but fail at doing. And you're not going to program illegality in when you are the legal actor who is programming that in. Like, just imagine the political backlash when someone comes out of prison and said the government programmed that I would nearly get stabbed. Like, I just don't think that's something that's realistically going to be the case, which means we get to remove specific aspects from the criminal environment that are disproportionately likely to lead individuals to commit crime again in the future. And this takes us over opening government, because the extent of opening government's claim was that rehabilitation is incentivized because it's not somebody else's problem. But this firstly assumes that most prison sentences are long, which they aren't. Most prison sentences are on the shorter end, and thus it's still within a given politician's time horizon. But secondly, we're going to flip opposition's claim on this, as Bobby highlights, which is that this is going to be seen by opposition's own claim as a potentially controversial technology, which means that when you as a politician and a criminal justice apparatus are implementing this technology, you need to gain the trust of the population by showing that it works on the individuals who you subject to this technology, which means you have the incentive to max out the rehabilitative capacity of that system. Otherwise, you are going to be blamed when those people get out as a result of the controversial technology and commit crime again in the future. Thus, we have a particular additional mechanism for this rehabilitation that goes beyond what opening government possesses and is crucially more important. Opening opposition. No? Okay.
So how do you, sorry.
Go ahead.
So how do you effectively reconcile society's thinking in respect of the extent of punishments being done, since society won't enter the machine and feel it?
As Bobby already responds, this changes over time when you get to see individuals' actual genuine experiences and hear reports of that. But also, a lot of societal reintegration is based on fears of crime, which I've already addressed. The next claim that we get from opening opposition is a claim that this will be seen as less deterrence because you don't actually lose your relationships. But as closing opposition points out, you do actually undergo the pain of not being able to talk to these people, which means, crucially, as Bobby highlights, when you get the opportunity to then go back into that society, have those friends and family you connect with, which you can't on opposition side of the house because those individuals often moved on with their lives. And so that friend and family network that's often crucial for reintegration can't occur. When you actually get to reconnect with those relationships, you feel much more fear about losing those relationships, which means you have a greater disincentive to commit crime again in the future because you do not want to have to experience the pain of losing those relationships another time. And thus you get an additional act of deterrence. The last claim I want to make here is on this punishment being deserved. Because I think ultimately something that is crucially important is that we do not commit a moral evil on these individuals again. And as Bobby highlights, the unpredictability of the prison experience, the fact that it could just be horrible for individuals above and beyond what they were sentenced to, can mean that we are committing an active moral evil on these individuals above what they are deserved. I think that is something that the state should not categorically do. Proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check both panels already? And I'm very happy to call on the opposition with him.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I'll start soon. First of all, you need to be aware this is a simulation. Otherwise, it literally infringes on all possible and probable principles that we have in the status quo, that you are aware of what your punishment is before the court of law. But also, if you think you are going there for 20 years, which means that you're not aware this is a simulation, you're going to sell off your house, you're going to quit your job, you're going to prepare your life for not being in reality for the next 20 years. And then all of their mechanisms about how you are better because you don't lose time don't work, because you lose time, because you think you are going to lose time. So you act as if you are actually going to lose time, but the simulation happens somewhere, but you're not aware of it before you go to the simulation. But let's talk of the worst case scenario, which is that they are right, that you are not aware, because you inherently become aware once you get out. I mean, this is pretty clear. If I was somewhere for 5 years mentally, but I am physically the same as I was before, then either I'm crazy or this was a simulation. But people are going to talk about this, right, Trenton? People are going to adapt, which means that you're necessarily going to know that the people are giving punishment as a sort of simulation. I mean, there's a big hole in their case because they say society will adapt, but no one will know this as a simulation when they go into the simulation. But even if that's not the case, if they don't tell you, then you realize after 5 days, and it's hell for you because you have to adapt and you don't have the time to process all of these things that happen to you mentally in a simulation. But now you're back in reality and you cannot communicate with other people because you have to cram 20 years of experience in a conversation with your old buddy who looks the same, but has lived 5 days while you lived 20 years, and it's horrible for you. So this destroys their principle of legitimacy of punishment. What happens when you leave the simulation? You have 20 years of experience, let's say, but your body is still as it was. Either you realize this was simulation, or your physicality and mind are distorted. I know that closing government says this in a sarcastic tone, so I think that makes it right. But imagine the perception of your mind and your body being something which is inherently not connected to each other. Your whole experience as a human is something where this is connected. So you grow older, you learn how to crawl, you learn how to walk, you do things. And with this, your mind also changes. This is reverse when you are old, right? So your mind also changes, but you cannot walk anymore, you cannot run anymore. This is an inherent infringement on the idea of bodily autonomy, but also the human experience as it is. This is the bigger principle than the marginal benefits that they gave us on both government sides in this debate, and they never engage with this, except the idea that you're not going to be realizing this is a simulation. Guys, also, we read the info slide. This needs to be realistic. If there is something which happens in the status quo, realistic means that it needs to happen in a similar way. You cannot just remove all of the bad things happening in this and then say, oh, it's going to be realistic, but it's actually going to be the best possible experience that you can have in prison. If it's going to be the best possible experience that you're going to have in prison, then the question that arises on governments is, does this change the idea of how much you are rehabilitated? Right? So they cannot run the idea that you're going to be rehabilitated in the same way, but without losing time, because it's going to be the same experience that you would have in prison. But on the other hand side, there's not going to be gangs, there's not going to be violence, the food is going to be take away all of the time and all of this, right? So, they're running away from the burden when they're characterizing the debate in this way. But what is more likely is that, more likely on the basis of income or severity, on a random basis, there needs to be happen. You're mentally stabbed, or you are mentally harmed, or you are mentally attacked. The problem here is that in real world, a lot of these things depend on the idea of how you interact and how you are as a person, how much rehabilitated you are. But in their simulation, a large part of it is a luck, a random factor that is programmed by the government. Right? This is the problem, because in reality, if something happens to me because a guy went mad in prison and he stabbed me, that's okay. But if the government programs in the simulation that this needs to happen to every 1,000 or 100,000 prisoner, because this is what happens right now, then the government is directly at fault for harming me on purpose. The negligence which happens in status quo because you don't prevent this in jails is worse than on purpose programming this into the simulation. Yes, it will be backlash, but this is how this motion needs to be set if it's going to be realistic. If it's not going to be realistic, you don't have other impacts. Drugs, gangs. Most people don't have this experience in jail, right? Especially because OG frames this as petty theft cases being most important. Even if you don't believe that this experience needs to be the same, in status quo, if jails are prone to violence and gangs, then the virtual one should be similar to this. this. OG can't say we acknowledge there are different circumstances in status quo and then not apply them and not meet burden. But also, if people will get accustomed to this as they have to rehabilitation, this is really important because this is the only thing left from closing government. If this is true, then this punishment is uniquely fucked up as it forces people to serve the sentence in the past bad times when it was set. What is the example? It is now 2021. I served 5 days of a 20-year sentence in 2021 times, because the simulation doesn't change from day 1 to day 2 to day 3, blah, blah, blah. But if it's the real sentence from 2021 to 2041, in 2031, according to their mechanization, jails become more rehabilitatory. And this is what I experience when it's a real sentence. While if it's in 2021 and I serve all of the things just in one time, they cannot program this into the simulation because it's predicting the future, how much and in what ways we are going to get more rehabilitatory. So if this is the track according to which the prison system goes and blah, 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 then you get worse outcomes on their side of house, opening then closing.
People will know it's a simulation, but that is not an impactful piece of knowledge if functionally you must behave as if it is real for a period that is functionally many years long. So you are rehabilitated in the same way as real prison.
Yes, but we still have arguments which talk about how after you exit, it's not the same, right? Closing.
Yeah, the info slide says it's fully real in the way you experience it, not that it is a realistic representation of prisons right now. Even if it is supposed to be somewhat realistic, governments obviously don't program in things that are actively illegal in prison, like gangs and drugs. So you lose on both logical and info slide ground.
Yeah, but if this is true, then all of the arguments which Ting basically runs, and this is the idea of people saying this is not real prison because it's not like this, which are generationally formed, come into place. This is the idea when people talk about, I don't trust this person because they were in jail for 5 times, and I have never seen this simulation. I've never realized this because I wasn't in the simulation, but I know what prison looks like. This is when judges and the whole like judicial system gives out more lifetime sentences because they don't trust that this is rehabilitated. This is where our extension actually comes into place in regards to this, because when you lose the connection with the real world, and I want to be clear that O identifies this is the case, but the mechanization and impacts are derived in Ting's speech in the beginning 3 minutes of the speech. But also other people don't get it. You can't explain. The unique impact is that inside of legal system, you will have increased pressure to put forward life sentences, but also that people will not trust you, and you will not be able to explain that you were rehabilitated because you need to cram 20 years of experience of rehabilitation in 5 days. And this is basically the case from CO.